Welcome to What the Frack.
We are your fractional team, and today we break down marketing trends, strategies, and tactics in
30 minutes or less
so that you can do the fun stuff like be creative. Welcome everybody to What the Frack Live. We are here. I am Tamara. I'm joined by my co-host, Nicole.
Hi.
And today we are talking about some really topical subjects, social media content for e-commerce, and what's on everybody's mind, the impact of TikTok Shop. And we'll get into the impact of TikTok basically, because there's a lot going on with it. And to talk about this, we are joined by an absolute phenomenon influencer, Paige, Connell. She is just on top of all these topics, and we couldn't be more excited to dive into it with her. Paige, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So before we get started, let me just tell everybody a little bit about your background. So you are a working mother of 4, God bless you, who shares relatable content on TikTok and Instagram, highlighting the everyday experiences of women balancing motherhood, careers, and relationships. Known for your candid insights on the mental load of motherhood and the challenges of creating equity at home and work, your content resonates with millions. It resonates with me for sure. You also advocate for affordable childcare, paid leave, and reproductive rights that sparks meaningful conversations about what families need to thrive. So thank you so much for being here. And I cannot wait to talk about this because this is something that I live through every single day. So to get started, you have 185,000 followers on Instagram, 240,000 on TikTok, which should come first for business owners, community building and selling. Which do you think needs to come first?
I think the community building, right? Building that trust in who you are, in your brand, in your product. I have found that the people who have the strongest communities are able to sell so much more easily, right? And so that's my perspective. I've also been on the other side of it where you're kind of building first and building that community second. But I have found that the people who've had that built-in community, who've put a ton of time and effort into it, that is where they thrive.
It takes a long time though, right? Like Nicole and I have just been talking about this, and like to build a community, it's not like how long did it take you to build your community? Because we see on average, it takes people about 3 years.
Yeah. So I started posting on TikTok probably 2 years ago, and I didn't have any intentions. It was really just for fun. So I like to say that I posted for fun for about a year before I started to intentionally create content on a specific cadence and with a specific purpose. I think had I done that sooner, I could have built a community that was geared towards what I wanted to focus on much quicker. But it takes time. It does. It just simply takes a lot of time to build that community.
Yeah. And just posting on TikTok doesn't necessarily build a community. What is it that you do that really does harness the power of engagement?
I think part of it is the content that I talk about is super specific to working mothers in particular. And so it is something that they are already grappling with. And my goal is to provide them value in the content. I can't just create content complaining about my life or telling them about my day. My goal ultimately is to help them articulate what they're experiencing, to be able to have more fruitful conversations with their manager about why they need more flexible work options, to have more meaningful conversations with their partner about how they can have equity so they can thrive in their careers, right? I'm trying to help women articulate something. And so even if it doesn't seem like I'm giving them a step-by-step guide, which I'm not, I am saying things in a way that give them the confidence to then have those conversations. And so you have to have purpose behind the content. You can't just make content for content. And then I also work really hard to engage with the community, which is in itself a full-time job, responding to comments, responding to DMs, engaging with people on stories. I try to answer every single direct message I get. And sometimes that's a lot. And that is work. That is work. It takes time and effort and mental load to do that. But that is where the community is. There's women that I've talked to on a daily basis now for years, and they are part of this community and they are very engaged.
I've heard that. I've heard that a lot from women. Well, maybe not just women, just influencers in general, people who have built large communities. I mean, from a business standpoint, we have seen some of the biggest company launches in recent history. And every time we go back to those case studies, I feel like they already had a community built, right? You don't have these big, $3 million in the first 24-hour launch and not have a community built. And so business owners who are trying to measure themselves against these case studies are falling very short. And it's not because they have a bad product or they had a bad launch. It's because they didn't put the steps in. And then seeing other influencers, I've heard a lot of them talking about how they used to respond to every comment. They used to be a part of the community, and then they see their engagement drop as they are not part of that conversation anymore, and they're not those engagements anymore. So it's really nice to hear like you saying that straight out, is like that's part of your growth plan. Like you have to fit it in to that growth plan. Is time for someone to be engaging with your community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and some people might say, at some point, yeah, what's the ROI on this? Why are you answering these DMs? But especially as you are building this community, those first steps are engaging, right? It can't be a one-way conversation. They don't want to just hear you tell them things all day long. They want to feel like it's a conversation with you and that they can come to you and ask a question and maybe actually get an answer from you. And so I think it is one of the most important parts of building a community online. And if you're creating content, it can't just be one way. It really does have to be that two-way conversation as much as possible.
And so I'm curious because there's a lot of entrepreneurs or female founders that are starting brands, and they're told they need to get out there, they need to build their community, and they get really stalled because they don't know exactly like they're like, oh, maybe I don't want to post every day, or maybe I don't want to put myself in front. What sort of boundaries or frameworks did you put in place for yourself in order to kind of thrive while doing this?
Sure. So I'm not creating content typically about my day-to-day life so much. You might see me going about my day-to-day life, but what I'm talking about doesn't have to do with me necessarily, right? I'm not telling you about my marriage or my child or whatever might have happened. And that's a boundary I've kind of set, which is most people who engage with me on the internet don't know my kids' names. They don't know my husband's name. They don't know any of those details, right? They know that I'm a working mom. They know I have 4 kids. They know I'm running off to dance class, whatever it might be, right? Because I'm giving them context to help facilitate the conversation, but only to a point. And I think that's a big fear of a lot of people, which is I don't want to be the brand. I worked in e-commerce for a long time, and we know that these founder-led brands do very well. People want to know who the founder is, and they want to relate to this person. And sometimes the founder just doesn't want that. They don't want to be the face. They don't want to be the brand. And then who is? Now who's the brand? Now who's carrying this message? And so I totally understand that. I think you can grow a business. I have a lot of friends in the space who've grown a business and very rarely show their face. Very rarely show their face. It's graphics, it's static posts, it's all these different things. And maybe on stories, they're showing their face, but people know who they are. They resonate with what they're saying, but they don't see them on a daily basis. So you can navigate this without becoming the brand itself.
Yeah. And I want to get into a lot of the like actual technical abilities that you have and smarts, because I think, you're definitely way more than just an influencer on TikTok, right? But one of the things that I think is really hard in getting started is this fear of pushback. And you talk about very important, but very controversial kind of like topics. And
Sure.
You seem very sure in who you are and your opinion. So how do you deal with the pieces of the internet that are not so nice to people?
Trolls.
Yeah. I get this question daily in my DMs. People are like, how do you deal with this? And my simple response is I often just don't. I don't look at it. There often is a point in which I stop looking at the comments or I stop engaging with a piece of content because it's gone past the point where it's worth my engagement, right? It's no longer being done in good faith. You're not going to win any kind of argument. There's no point, right? And so that is part of it, which is I'm able to look at a piece of content. If it has gone viral in a certain way, you know that it is always going to hit a different side of the internet at some point. And for my own mental health, I just don't look at that point. When it hits that, when I see that first comment, that first troll start coming in, I'm like, okay, now I'm out. Now I'm out of the conversation. And so not everybody can compartmentalize that way. I will also say I can mostly take these comments with a grain of salt. I don't know this person. I probably don't respect this person in a way that would make me take what they're saying seriously about this topic. That's not always the case, right? But it's a random stranger on the internet that doesn't have a picture, that has no kind of expertise in this area. I'm not going to worry about this so much. On a bad day, though, I've told my therapist this, on a bad day, I hate to see one of these comments, right? It can be really hard because I'm sure you both feel this way. I feel very passionately about the things I talk about. And often when I talk about isn't just opinion, it's rooted in data, it's systemic issues, it's these proven things. And so I think that's part of the confidence too, where I'm not just making things up. I'm not just saying things that I feel. I'm talking about things that truly exist and the experience of being on the receiving end of these systems or things that happen ultimately.
Yeah. And Tamara, I mean, the reason I asked that question is because working with clients, right? A lot of our audience is small businesses. They're trying to figure out how do they navigate the internet? How do they navigate social media? How do they navigate someone who is not necessarily agreeing with some of the things that they're putting out there? How controversial should they be? Should they respond to the negative comments, right? And there's on a daily basis, I'm getting asked those questions. And it really comes back to, it's funny. We've had multiple of these lives in a row here where we've talked about things like core values and storytelling and being authentic. And I think one of the things that social media, you grow faster when people can relate to you and you are authentic in what you're talking about, whether they agree with you or not. They can feel like you're their best friend, right? And the way I always talk about influencers and this idea of community is that you're basically back before the internet, we would hey, I need a roofer. We'd go to our neighbor and ask, who do you use for roofing? We go to that neighbor and ask, who do you use for roofing, right? And now we're just kind of taking that online. So you're building this trust, you're building this community, you're building people who feel like they could talk to you about anything and that you are speaking the things they feel they can't speak, right? And so there is a line with businesses on that. But if you are really finding that your core demographic is feeling a certain way and you're speaking that truth, the people coming in and saying mean things to you are not your core demographic and they're not your customers. And we have to be okay with that.
Exactly. And to be honest, I do sometimes respond to comments when I think there's an opportunity to expand on an idea that is aligned with what we're already talking about. So if somebody leaves a comment that is either in disagreement or not, is sometimes not even in good faith, right? But it's a comment that is maybe a persistent narrative that we're trying to combat or something that I talk about often. I will use that comment as an opportunity to elaborate on a topic, to continue to flex that muscle of sharing an idea and sharing expertise on a specific topic. I will do that. I will engage in that. I do think that is helpful because oftentimes what I hear is, I keep hearing this pushback. How do I deal with it? And so then I get the pushback and I say, okay, this is how I deal with it. This is what I'm going to say. And so I think it is, I also think, I've had friends who've posted something that they feel really passionately about and they'll say, I just lost 5,000 followers. And we'll come to them and, we're in this big group chat and say, that's okay. Those weren't the followers you need right now, right? If they don't align with this idea, this topic, especially if it's something having to do with what you already focus on, or even just to do with you as a person, that's okay, right? That's okay. There's 5,000 other followers that you will gain from something else you talk about. And so I think having that mindset is really important. I lose followers every single day. I am always losing followers. Everybody's always losing followers. It is okay. I'm always gaining more. every single day, right? So it's
Tamara,
okay.
it's feedback loops. Feedback loops. Okay. This is important in every piece of your business. Like that, this is not just social media, guys. Not just social media. You have to listen to your clients and like know that like we're not going to serve every client out there. Like Tamara, this is your favorite thing.
I know it really is. And I think it goes back to it's knowing what your purpose is, knowing what your values are, knowing what you want to accomplish, right? So like for small business owners, like what is your goal? What is your purpose for doing what you're doing? And then everything else should fall into place, right? So so if you've gained the wrong followers and you lose them, you're not losing anything. You weren't going to achieve anything there anyways. So don't sweat it. You can't sweat the number. You have to, it's the outcome, not the output.
Yeah.
I would say it reminds me of when I first started out in one of my positions in e-commerce. I was customer facing. I was in sales, and I had this really, really angry customer and not due to any fault of my own, but he was angry, like very angry. And I remember coming to my boss, who I worked with for 10 years after this, and telling him about it. And I was like, this is a huge issue. Like, we have a big problem here. And he was like, we don't. He's like, we have a really loud problem. He's very loud. It's not actually a big problem, and we're not for everyone, and that is absolutely okay. And I ended up working in customer success for a while within that organization and flexed that muscle a lot, where I said, I totally hear you. It sounds like maybe we're not the brand for you, and that's okay. And so here's your refund, and we're going to move along. And I'm really happy that you've learned that we're not for you, and I'm happy for us that we've learned you're not for us. And I think that's what's also made this easier for me in the social media world, which is I've already done that for 10 years in a different forum in e-commerce, right? But it's the same conversations. Your brand is not for everyone. Your business is not for everyone. Not everyone is going to like your product, and that's okay. If it's a loud problem, that is different than a big problem. If all of my followers were DMing me frustrated about the same thing, then that's something I'm going to take notice of. If it's just one person who just keeps coming at me, chances are they need to unfollow. I need to block. We just need to move on because it's not productive.
My one of my mentors always said that 80% of your problems are going to come from 20% of your clients. And as soon as you get rid of those 20% of those clients who are not the right fit, your life and your business and your processes and everything gets so much better. And I think that this is, although not the topic that we were expecting to talk about today, this is like one of the biggest topics that I think is going to help so many business owners. It's something that intellectually I think everyone knows, but it is so hard to implement, and you don't hear people talk about it enough, which is your addressable market is not necessarily like that number that we put on startup pitch decks is not necessarily everyone you are going to like need to bend and break for, essentially. Okay, well, switching topics a little bit because I don't want to spend all the time here. I think that a lot of our audience would be really interested in hearing a little bit about your expertise on TikTok sales. And I'm curious how you feel the TikTok ban, what that means for businesses.
Yeah. So actually I got started on TikTok because one of the brands that we owned at the time at my company was doing well on TikTok. And it was still somewhat early days of TikTok. And we weren't on TikTok Shop, but anytime, this was a founder-led brand. So anytime the founder got on TikTok, had a viral-ish video, we had great sales. We'd say, wow, what happened today? Like, why is the conversion so high? TikTok did it. And that is why I started posting on TikTok. I was like, I want to understand this platform. I want to understand this algorithm. I want to understand how this works. I ultimately found myself a new career, which is amazing. But that is how I got started on TikTok. And so now, this was pre-TikTok Shop. Now we have TikTok Shop, right? And TikTok Shop has not only been a game changer for influencers to make money. I mean, it has changed people's lives in affiliate marketing, essentially. It is also really, really amazing for brands. I think of a brand like Cakes, and I don't think that would have been possible without, are you guys familiar with Cakes?
Yeah.
I'm not.
Oh, you're not.
Okay. Well, You'll have to look them up. But I mean, they've been on Shark Tank. They've done very well for themselves, but a huge part of their business is TikTok Shop. It is TikTok. And I think the opportunity that it presented for small businesses to market in a way that's never been available to them before, to reach an audience that's never been available to them before, was just truly next level. And I think without it, it's kind of like when the Facebook iOS thing happened. It's like everybody's going to have to figure out a new way forward, because this is such a powerful tool for growth that I think can't really be replicated right now.
Well, live, I mean, I am a huge advocate. I believe that live selling shopping is the future of shopping. If you look at it in Asia, it is how everything is basically done. The live selling and the online and the kind of like instant purchases, it's phenomenal. And in the US, it's now taking off. And TikTok there's been several different platforms, but TikTok definitely like jumped in there to harness it. And what you said, it has literally made brands. It has, you know, I personally know people that are selling millions of dollars of product a day through TikTok Shop. But there's a strategy to it. It's not everybody can go on there and do it. And you actually, you have to do the live selling part of it in order to really make it exceptional. At least that's what I've been seeing as the success. What do you see as the tips and tricks for like harnessing the power of TikTok Shop?
Yeah, so I think so I'm more so on the influencer side, right? So I can tell you what I know is working on that side, which is when you find, we've already talked about this, when you find somebody with that community that is so highly engaged, they don't even have to talk about it. If they link that thing in TikTok Shop on their video, their following is buying it, right? And so it is a new version of influencer marketing, essentially, right? It's not your typical affiliate. It's not your typical paid brand deal, but people are doing this organically, right? They're linking it because they use it. They're linking it because they bought it. It is this, it's this really easy way for the influencer to make money. But when there's that built-in community, it is a really great way for these brands to tap into a market they didn't have access to before. And I will say this I am friendly with this creator who has millions of followers. I don't know how we became friendly, but we are friendly. She mentioned my name in one video, mentioned my name overnight, 20,000 new followers overnight. And I did not, she mentioned me, like mentioned. And so that is the power we know of influencer marketing, right? Like that, if you get the right community with the right influencer, you have this huge opportunity. And I think with TikTok Shop in particular, I even think of like the beach waiver that does crazy on TikTok Shop, right? That curling iron, you get that in the hands of that community and it goes crazy, right? Yeah. And so I think that works. I will actually say, I think to your point, it is actually not super simple from the brand side to grow on TikTok Shop. I think you really have to have a product market fit and know exactly who you're targeting on that algorithm. And your content also has to cater to that a bit. The content has to make sense to get in front of the right people on the right algorithms with the right influencers. It's not as simple as just throwing up your TikTok Shop and the money will come. It is not going to come. Yeah. It is not. You need to, it is a ton of work. It can change your business, but it is still a ton of work. And it's a whole new version of, it's a whole new marketplace that you have to learn. Yeah. And it's different than all the other marketplaces. And so I actually think it's quite difficult because it is also incredibly saturated now. It's almost, and I don't think there's becoming more experts in it, but right on Amazon, you can hire a expert to run your Amazon marketplace and to fight with all of the resellers and to do all of that for you. Much more difficult to kind of navigate that on TikTok because it's still so new.
Yeah, what about, I was going to say, sorry, all I was going to say is that, like, you know, I'm sure there's business owners listening to this going, yeah, this is great, but like how, why, like it is too overwhelming. And I think for me, it's similar to a lot of like startups. When I work with a lot of startups, I find so many of them that have great ideas that shouldn't be their own company. It should be like a plug into something else. Like, let's leverage this other piece. And so I think, like, if you are a business out there who is looking to use TikTok shops or even TikTok or even some of these other social media platforms, sometimes it might be better, instead of like getting on there and trying to struggle through your first 1,000 followers and finding the algorithm and all the pieces and hiring a really expensive agency to help you out. Maybe we should be looking at like, okay, Paige here has 200,000 followers who are your exact audience. Maybe we should be figuring out, how do we work together? And that could be partnerships, that can be influencer deals, that could be making sure even feedback loops, right? Working with them to hear the audience and put out topics that could be helpful. It could be it could even be funding research or funding pieces of what they're passionate about, so that you're part of the conversation, right? Mm. There's lots of creative ways we can work as influencers. What, I guess, from your perspective as the influencer, as someone who wants to work with brands who are pushing what you love the most and what you're passionate most, what would be ways that you would suggest that they look into kind of starting on a TikTok, starting with someone who's already out there?
Sure. So I think the biggest thing is actually finding, to what you said, alignment. You can't just reach out to every TikToker and say, do you want a free product, and then promote us on TikTok Shop. People are going to say yes. There's plenty of people who are going to say yes. Their content's not going to be great. They're not going to have conversions. You're not going to see the results that you want. You really need to find people that are aligned with the community you're looking to target, right? Your core demographic. You need to know what their conversions look like. I think that's a really important thing that a lot of people miss, which is, yes, I just told you this story of how this woman has a very sticky community that is willing to follow somebody willy-nilly, right? Like, they just followed me because she mentioned my name. There's also people with millions of followers, and they don't convert on anything. They don't buy anything at all. And so it's really important that you don't just look at follower count, that you don't just look at the community and their demographic, but you're looking at the engagement. Are people engaging with their content? Are people clicking on their links? Are people doing that? If they're not doing that, you're not going to get anything out of this other than brand awareness. And maybe that's all you're looking for. Like, brand awareness is great. A lot of brands pay a lot of money to solely be kind of shown to somebody's audience, even if they don't have clicks. But at the end of the day, especially if you're a small business, you're looking for some return on this investment typically. And so the engagement is the core piece. If you are not familiar, like, you need to ask for that. And that will tell you the story that you need more than follower count ever really will.
Yeah, engagement and the conversion, you're right. That's like the important question to ask. I remember it was like 3 years ago, I learned that the hard way, where I was asking the engagement questions. And so I tapped this influencer that had 3.5 million followers, and the engagement was decent. I was like, okay, this is good. And so we paid for a spot and had like 3 conversions. It was absolutely miserable. And after that, and going back and forth with the agent that I was dealing with, I asked for the other conversion rates to find out they were dismal. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that's something I'll never do again, right? Like, I was like, oh, I thought engagement would be good enough. No, you've got to ask for past references.
Yeah. And I would also say a part that a lot of people, I think, really mess up on is micromanaging influencers in a way. If they have good conversions, if they have good engagement, if they have the following you're looking for, ultimately, it's good to trust their instinct on what the content should look like. You all have your talking points that you want. You have your brand identity. At the end of the day, when you're paying an influencer to talk about your product, it's about their experience of your product and selling it to their audience, not about your product at the end of the day, right? It's like the idea of the product. It's what your product's delivering for that influencer. And so what I've seen perform the worst, even on my own channels, is when a brand tells me, you have to say exactly this at exactly this time. You have to show the product like this. You need to do this. And then I need you to read off of a script. And I'll go back to them and say, I'm happy to do all of this. It's not going to work well for you. I'm happy to. I'm telling you, I know it doesn't perform well with my audience. I will tell you what does. And sometimes I'll even give them 2 versions. I'll say, this is your version. This is my version. Like, you do what you will with this. Almost always, though, our audience will know that we are catering to what the brand has asked us to say, and not what we would normally do in this instance, or how we would normally kind of talk about a product or an experience. And so I think that's also really important. I think we're so protective of our businesses, of our brands, of our products, don't say that word, say this word, right? Never use this term, use this term. And that, I get it. I totally understand it from a brand perspective. It's going to, though, ultimately impact the end result on the influencer side and could hinder the performance of that partnership.
Wait, I got to ask
influencers.
Wait.
Yeah, go for it.
I want to ask then. So should it be a red flag? Because there's a lot of, like people, small business owners, entrepreneurs who do their own, like reaching out to influencers. Sure. Should it be a red flag then if the influencer comes back and says, provide me with the, the material that you want, provide me with the all of that, with the graphics? Like I've seen that happen before.
Yeah, no, I always get a brief. There's always a brief. There's always photos. There's always a guide, right? There's always a guide. And the larger the brand, the bigger the guide, the bigger the brief, right? But almost always, even with the biggest brands, they'll say, we love these 2 videos you did that are just like regular videos. They're not partnerships. Can you make them like this, just with these ideas? Like put into it. And like, can you just make sure to mention XYZ? And so I think as an influencer, I expect a brief. I expect a PDF of the brand identity. I expect all of those things. And I think actually it is incredibly helpful for me as an influencer to understand your business better, to understand your product. Where I think it gets sticky is when, like if somebody was like, I need a script, I don't think that is, I don't think it's going to be the most genuine content, right? So oftentimes in my experience, it's a brand is giving me this brief. They're telling me the initiative that they have, whether it's a sale or a product or a new launch or whatever it might be. They will give me a guidebook and then typically the CTA, like exactly what they want me to get people to do. And then I present them with my concept. I say, this is how I plan to talk about this. This is what I would do. And then they can say, like, actually, you can never say this because legally not allowed or whatever, right? Like they'll tell you, and that's good. But that's typically the process. And so we'll go back and forth a little bit. And ultimately, I record, right? And then I give it to them and say, like, if you're good with this, then I'm going to put it up, right? So I don't think it's a red flag if an influencer asks for guides or a brief or talking points. It's more so, I think the issue is when every line is kind of micromanaged and the influencer doesn't actually get to show up in the way that their community is used to them showing up. Because then it just takes away from that authenticity, which is why you follow someone.
Well, and that's the thing is when you get to a point as an influencer where you are getting jobs, right? You're starting to run as a business the same way I know my business, my audience wants to hear these certain things and they relate to these certain things and they, this works for them and this doesn't. You understand your audience and what is going to get them. And at the end of the day, you're getting paid to hit that conversion. So you're going to want to hit that conversion. Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing that we glossed over that is really important for business owners, because I see it very often where they get very shy about this, is anytime you are buying advertising space, you're buying influencer space, you are buying even conference space, and even speaking engagements, right? It is okay and actually very good for you to ask about. They should know their demographic information. They should know their conversion rates. They should know their engagement numbers. And these are things you can ask for. And a lot of times the people who have it together kind of give it to you up front. But if they don't, ask for it. And we're used to doing that as an agency, but so many of our clients are like scared to ask for that information. Like they're like, it's a privacy thing. That is part of an engagement in advertising, in influencer, in social media, in all of those spaces. So feel free to ask for that information.
Yeah. I would also say you should understand the platforms you're working on, right? So there's legal things involved, whether it's a paid partnership toggle or certain hashtags and all these things. And I think what a lot of brands don't understand is, right, say my average video gets 80,000 views. My paid partnerships will get 20, maybe 30, sometimes 5, because of the algorithm. The algorithm will intentionally suppress paid content. And so the second a paid partnership toggle goes on, the content can get suppressed. And it's just because the algorithm's not trying to show that to people, right? They don't want to show your paid partnership. They don't want that. And so it's also understanding how these things work, which is where things like whitelisting come in if you're not familiar with whitelisting, and putting advertising dollars behind this content. Because ultimately, as an influencer, I expect a brand to come to me with a robust package. Don't come to me with just a paid partnership deal. Like, you should want to use this content for advertising, because that's half the benefit of me creating it, is that you could use this for advertising, right? And so, it is a little bit more nuanced than just a person presenting your product at the end of the day. And so it's really important for companies to understand, what's the difference between a story and a reel? Why would I pay for a reel over a story? Or why would I pay for TikTok over Instagram? And to be honest, most brands are paying way more money for paid spots on Instagram because they do better than TikTok. TikTok suppresses them more than Instagram does. So being well-versed in this, understanding this, is really important, because otherwise, like, no influencer is going to tell you no. If you ask to pay for Instagram, TikTok, and a story, they're going to say, sure, I'll give all of it to you. They're going to say that. You might be disappointed by how certain parts of it perform, because you're maybe not aware of how those platforms treat that kind of content.
Yeah.
It's really valuable. Very valuable.
I know. That's like the biggest tip right there, because I think that with small businesses, especially, or growing startups and things like that, there's a curtain up over the how deals like this actually work and what actually takes to get all of this. And I guess my question to you is, do you see, I know that a lot of brands with smaller budgets try to go for the affiliate marketing, or I'll give you a percentage of every sale, or kickbacks, or things like that. Do you see that they work similarly, better, worse than actually a full campaign kind of setup?
I think it depends on the influencer, transparently. I think it depends on their kind of content. I don't do a lot of affiliate, because I'm not that person who's constantly talking about products or brands. That's not what I'm doing, right? So when I do a paid partnership, it's almost always like so closely tied with a topic, like a thought leader idea, as opposed to my favorite water bottle, right? Like, they're just it's not what I'm talking about, right? So it wouldn't make sense for me to do affiliate, because for affiliate to do well, I just have to talk about it a lot. I need to constantly be reminding people about it. And so, but I have friends in this space who do incredibly well on affiliate, which works very well for the brand, but it has to be something that makes sense for their audience. And it has to be something that they can continually be talking about, because that is how you continually get it in front of people's eyes, right? And that is kind of where, like, stories on Instagram, for example, come in, because stories are a great place to do affiliate marketing. I think affiliate's great. I also think affiliate's really good for micro influencers and smaller influencers, because they tend to have a really highly engaged community, even if it's not a large community. And so they can really drive more traffic there, even if they can't maybe get as many eyes on a paid partnership, for example. There's a lower risk for the brand, higher reward overall for the influencer. And so I do think affiliate's great. It's just going to be highly dependent on the audience, the size of the following, and the effort that the person puts in. You can be an affiliate and never drive anybody to somebody's, site.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that is the case, but I guess there's less risk, right, involved in that instance.
Yeah.
For the brand.
Paige, I was going to say, Tamara, I think our audience wants us to keep asking questions, and I could forever. Yeah. But Tamara, I know there's a really, really good topic, talking about thought leadership, that you saw on LinkedIn, that you have a burning question about.
Yeah. Well, and actually, we don't have to dive too deep into it, because now we've been talking so long, and I went down the rabbit hole of just the information that you've been talking about. It is so relevant to moms, right? And as a mom, obviously, I got really heated when I read one of your last posts about remote work. And I think this is also very relevant for a lot of female founders, women entrepreneurs who are working from home, trying to build a business. And what you were talking about was the new narrative that's happening with remote work, that it is a cost savings for the family, because the mom can work full time and take care of the children.
Oh, boy.
And it's such a myth that, it is absolutely possible. Us moms have done it. We do it when we have to. Our kids get sick. We work from home. I personally worked through the pandemic full time raising my daughter, who was a year and a half at the time. And work didn't go down for me. I was working 11 to 14-hour days while being the person who took care of this, 1.5-year-old.
Right.
And I think I lost my mind. Like,
Yeah.
doing both, like being on conference calls and having to be on video while like coloring with her and teaching her ABCs, right? Like, it's not a fair situation to put moms into. And you did a post on it, had a huge reaction. I'd love to just hear your thoughts on this, because it's so important for the work-life balance that us moms can have with having careers, having businesses.
Yeah. So I think it's so interesting because I, similar to you, became a remote worker during the pandemic. I was pregnant. I had 2 toddlers. It was probably the worst 2 years of my life. I was so burnt out and drained and just at a breaking point. It was not sustainable. And so many women and parents went through that experience, right? Being remote workers, having our children home with us. And there was this it was semi-acceptable, right? Because there was no childcare. There was nothing, there was no other option. We were all doing it together.
You just did it.
Now though, right? Most people are returning to the office in some way. Maybe they're hybrid, maybe they're fully back to the office, but there's this subset of us who remain remote. And there's this interesting narrative that I especially see on Instagram, TikTok, but I've even seen it on LinkedIn, and you'll see it in the comment section of that post, which is that if you are a remote worker, then you should also be able to take care of your kids, right? And there's this narrative that like, wait, you work from home. Why are your kids in daycare? And there's this assumption that because you work from home, you have all this free time. When in reality, I think most remote workers would tell you that they actually feel like they have even less time because now they are kind of like forced to always be on. There is no commute. There's no end. It is always happening. And so they're not only expected to work full time from home, but they're expected to fold the laundry and pick up the kids and be the flexible person and all of the things. But this idea that women in particular should be able to work from home while providing childcare is just crazy to me for so many reasons. But I think it's a direct result of the childcare crisis as well, which is the fact that there is very little affordable, accessible childcare for families. Narrative that it's actually acceptable and or normal is really there because there is no end in sight or support for working parents when it comes to the things we need, like paid leave or affordable childcare or flexible work options. There is no even accessible after school programs. Yeah, all of the things, right? So I think it is such a complex topic, but I do think it is so important we talk about it because it's this it's this idea that so many women are grappling with where they also question themselves and they say like, wait, should I be able to work and take care of my kids at the same time? Like it feels impossible, but she's doing it.
People are telling me I have to do it. I must be capable. Yeah. And it's not fair.
No, it's not fair.
Well, and the thing that's really interesting here, I don't have kids, so I've never really thought of it from this perspective. And but I do keep in touch with like the business like news cycle, right? And I just got an article from the Phoenix Business Journal about how CEOs are wanting people to come back to work in the office, all of this, right? And the conversation has always been around like, is it good for the business? And then and what I think is really interesting is we just had another live where we're talking about more women, how there's only 1% of women business owners in the creative agency field, and more women, the conversation around more women in some of these leadership positions, whether they own it or they're just in leadership decision-making spots, can really open up the space for these conversations, right? Because if you're not thinking, because it's not your reality, right, it may never come to mind that that could be an issue, right? And so I think that it's a really interesting spot to say, I know an agency owner up in Colorado. Both agency owners are moms. They started their agency because they were working moms who could not fit into the daily life. And so they're building their business differently so that all their employees are working moms who can share in like that conversation of how do we build our processes to fit that.
Yeah.
not enough is happening of that.
No. And you know what? This is such a complex issue because there's so many things that are tied into it, right? I talk a lot about gender equity and specifically in the home, but how that impacts the workplace, right? Women tend to do the bulk of the childcare. They do the bulk of the management of the home, the chores, etc., which means they have less time for paid work. They're also expected to be the one to take the more flexible job, the hybrid job, the remote job. And now we know that if you remain remote, you're less likely to get promoted, right? Which like furthers the motherhood penalty, which already exists, right? There's no wage gap until you become a mother, and now there is, right? So it's this incredibly complex topic where remote work has been this amazing thing for so many women in particular, because it's allowed us to pick up our kids at the bus stop while still having this career, but it still holds us back in a way that most men are not being held back, right? And so it's really complex. I wish that it was something that was more widely accepted by both men and women overall, right? That we saw just as much participation from men in this caregiving work, which would make it less of a conversation about, oh, is she a work from home mom, right? Or is she just a remote employee? And so I think it's just this really, it's such so much of this is deeply ingrained in how we view men and women in the workplace, right? And how we view parents and the double standards that exist. And ultimately, I think it's a result of systemic issues and a lack of supports for families that we desperately need in a world where most homes are dual income homes. So, and that is the reality that we live in these days.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for, engaging with me on that, because I saw that post and I was just like, I wanted to throw my papers off my desk. So we've talked about so much. If there was one piece of advice, one actionable insight for small business owners, entrepreneurs that you could give them, leaving this conversation, what would it be?
Yeah, I think I would really focus on that idea. We talked a little bit at the very beginning of this conversation about community, being really intentional about the community you're building based on whatever the product or service you might have is really, really important. Know who you're attracting, because ultimately, if you build a community that doesn't want what you're selling, it's not going to do you any good. And so I think that is, if you're thinking about social selling, influencer marketing, building your own founder-led brand on social media, start with a community in mind. Don't start with the product. Don't start with you. Start with who you're trying to attract, and then create content for those people. Because you can create content for the masses, and that's great. It just won't convert for you. So, if you're thinking and you're just starting out, I would just really be intentional about who you're talking to.
If anyone's going to know about converting content, we have Paige here who understands content, understands e-commerce. I mean, you understand it all. And I am so happy to have had you here. I think that our audience has a lot of good nuggets to take away from this. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I can't believe it was 50 minutes. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, of course. You're welcome.
How can everyone find you?
Sure. On all social media, I am at She Is a Paige Turner, but you can also find me by my name, Paige Connell. And that is where you'll find me on LinkedIn as well.
Beautiful.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. You can follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to us on YouTube, and you can also join our newsletter for extra insight. Have a great day.